Sweet. Thanks, Morgan. Appreciate it. Hi. My name is Mike. And if you know the channel, you know me. At least you should. And if not, you'll get to know me here shortly. So I am doing something different tonight. We're doing a little bit of world building, but this is really relaxed and it's more of a conversation. So I hope you are prepared, folks in chat, to be a little interactive. I've got some things that I've got planned, but we're not going to shake the pillars of heaven necessarily this evening. We're going to try to just hang out and talk for a second. I've added background music, which we don't normally have on stream. I need your help, chat, to tell me whether or not it's too loud, too quiet, or just right. And then after I hear from you, we'll make a determination. Yeah, so those of you out there, and those of you especially who have listened to the show, which is all of you likely, at least in some regard, on the podcast side, I really enjoy the process when it comes to adding music and like layering music and effects into some of the episodes that we do. It's really not something that we get involved with on stream. And that's for a couple of reasons. But one of it is it's a lot to do. It's as any sort of, I know for a fact there's a DJ in chat, and he can probably agree with me that there's more than enough buttons to push over here. I don't know that I need any more buttons to push. But when we have the opportunity to, I like to sit back and I like to hang out, and it's helpful for me to have music on. I consider myself sort of like a child of music. So I grew up in a very musical family, in the sense that my older brother played guitar. My father was a drummer in bands for, 15 years or so. And so there was always a musical instrument around. There was always music in the house. The Greek side of my family is super, super, super into music. It's sort of like the lifeblood of what goes on. I was exposed to a lot of really strange Greek music when I was traditional Greek music, which is not something that would even touch radio here in the States. But it's sort of part of life, and I guess it's sort of part of me. And so there's your nugget of getting to know me is through music. So tonight is really about world building in the sense, but we're going to do the rundown first, which is what I like to do. Hey, thanks for the subscription. And as some of you might be able to tell, we seem to have fixed some of the alerts, which is super helpful. I spent the better part of a few hours last night just hammering away inside of all the different alerts and trying to get it figured out. Streaming is something that we're still getting our feet wet into. Yeah, we've streamed a bunch of shows, and certainly the Shadowrun stream was a ton of fun. And Stealing Immortality has been great, but there really isn't a ton of, there haven't been a ton of like screen alerts or images or that sort of thing. And so I want to test something out because it won't bother anybody. Hey, Dean. What's up, buddy? Thanks for subscribing. Appreciate that. That's super helpful. So what I'm going to do is something that hasn't been done on the channel yet. And I like to sort of be first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play something. So those of you who are maybe a little uneducated when it comes to Twitch, that's okay. Channel points are a thing that you get when you hang out here. When you earn enough channel points, you can use certain abilities. Some of those abilities on game nights are super powerful, and one of them is called the Hand of Fate. Now, you can use the Hand of Fate in the power-ups and rewards section on Twitch here for redeeming things that can happen during game. And so what I did was I made alerts specifically for the Hand of Fate. Now I just want to see how they work. Hi, Kit. Hi, Bramble. Good to see the both of you. So when you purchase the Hand of Fate, it'll say during any live play, purchase this Hand of Fate and play it for any character on stream. So I will say, let's imagine we're playing it for Emerenzia. right? So if I type Emerenzi's name in, I'm going to play the Hand of Fate. And when we do Hand of Fate it live in game, what happens is that the keeper, handler, storyteller, etc., is going to give them some sort of beneficial outcome, and that could be as simple as they failed the roll. Maybe they critically failed the roll, and somebody out in the audience really loves that character, and what they want to do is save that person from whatever terrible thing is going to happen, right? So I'll play it for them, and then we're going to see it on screen, and hopefully the alert doesn't totally bork things. If it does, then you can just blame me because I made it. Maybe we'll do something. Maybe it won't do anything. Okay. So no alert went off. So at least nothing crazy happened. That's good. Yeah, I agree, Pesto. Borking things is fun. But you do get to see it in chat there, which is kind of cool. And I get to see it here in the back end. So I can see that the activity. I always have to figure that out. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. So I want to talk about news. And I want to talk not the national news, not your local news, not your weather on the threes either. What I want to do is I want to talk about show news and sort of what we're doing, why it's important, and hopefully why you're interested in it, right? So we've got a lot of new stuff coming out the next couple months, and it's a really great opportunity to sort of get invested and get involved in what we do. So May is really like a sneaky Delta Green month, especially if you're a backer. So not only is OCell back in May, they return very shortly here in May. I know that many people are a huge fan of our Delta Green OCell and all of the machinations of things that are going on, but we're going to see a return to Impossible Landscapes in the next portion of that show and the next portion of that game, and that is a segment called A Volume of Secret Faces. And we get to see what has gone on, what has transpired a little bit. And it's really great to be back at the table with those players, just an absolute amazing crew who I get to share space with and to really create with. I think it goes without saying that when you have people who are willing to dedicate themselves to any one task together, there is a way to feed off those, feed off the energy that exists only in that space. So behind the scenes, there was a little bit of time between when I was able to really put down what I was doing at the time to get back to Delta Green. I wanted to get back sooner than we did, but there were just too many things going on to where I didn't feel like I could give the game like the 100%, 110% energy level that it deserves. So once I got back involved and was ready to go, and we sat down at the table, and it took us, I don't know, less than 5 minutes. And like all the old energy comes back at the table and everybody's, together. And it's really rewarding. I think that when you create something together with people, I think it's a completely different environment than creating something on your own. And that can be good or bad, right? So I've been a part of a lot of creative endeavors, and I've been lucky to be a part of doing creations with people that I have never met before, and we'll sit down and create something together. I've created stuff with people across the world. I've created stuff with friends who live across the, city or state or whatnot. But the energy is different. Every creative endeavor is different. And that's sort of will dovetail into the later on conversation about world building. But I think what's great about that is that it gives you an opportunity to stretch, right? And so one of the things that I've benefited from is traveling, and I get to play with a lot of people now who have traveled or who live in other places. And so you get these different cultural elements, I think, that are super important to understanding different perspectives. And it's a beautiful way to liberate yourself from a sheltered mindset. There's way more around that goes on than just your 4-block radius around your house or even in your city. So super fun to be back with them. And so OCell returns in May, and that is the show for that everybody can get a hold of. and you'll get a chance to hear all those common voices back again. So that'll be great. And then, as if that was not enough, because you, the backers, who are some of you who are with us tonight, chose more Delta Green recently during a backer poll, you are getting another episode of God's Teeth. So God's Teeth is a dramatically different type of show, even though it's in the same Delta Green universe as a whole. It's a different storyline. It's a different feel. It's something that's got a lot of understandably important content warnings on it. If you've read anything about the campaign, sort of the arc of it, or if you've read my posts about it on anytime that I've mentioned it, or you just understand that it's got a lot of really important things that you'd want to have those session zeros. And I know that there's people out there who have talked recently about that there's not a need for them, or I play at home with my friends, and so we don't need to talk about things. That's not true. That's just my opinion. It's 10 after 7, and I'm here to give you as many hot takes as possible. It's just not true, because you don't know what's changed in your friends' lives all the time. You don't know what's happened to them. You might not know every secret. You might not know everything that's happened in their past because they're dealing with that trauma on their own. And so it's really important, even if you play with someone regularly, even if they are very good friends with you, that you have session zeros and you talk about what content warnings there are at, because I see it as an advantage, honestly. It allows me to play directly up to the line. It allows me to go as far as the player and the table collectively as we were willing to go. And so super, super helpful for that. So if you are a backer and you're going to begin listening to God's Teeth, or you're going to continue, as you'll be getting your second episode now that the prelude already dropped, just be mindful of the content warnings. Be prepared. I don't hold back in any of those sessions. And the cast understood that. And we always talked before, recording those portions of God's Teeth, that they understood that I'm psychologically coming for your lunch money, because this operation should hurt. It should. And I think that we conveyed it pretty well. So I'll be looking to see more feedback on that. And then, as if your May wasn't cool enough already, you are going to get, on the 14th of May, you are going to get the first prelude in the new series, the new Trail of Cthulhu series, Silent Screams, headed up by the head of Mythos Horror here on the Old Ways, and that's Mix Rena Henze. They are collected around an amazing cast of their own, and we're going to begin issuing the preludes. I have several of them done already, and they'll be coming out relatively soon. And the great part about that is that means that more mythos horror is coming to your ears, which is great, because we got a lot of fans of that, and there is no reason not to deliver more of it to you, right? Okay. So that is part of what's going on. And then this week, Thursday, a couple of days from now, we are going to hit up Stealing Immortality. So there'll be another episode here, streamed right here on Twitch, of our ghoulies, my beloved ghoulies, who will be, just say dealing with some things all their own. They have their own set of challenges and problems, and we'll see how they fare out to sea, which should be a ton of fun. I'm really looking forward to that. I have been a longtime fan and player of the World of Darkness for a ton of different reasons. I know that in some circles it might get a bad rap because of some of the aspects of it. But really, like throughout the gaming history, I felt like I didn't really get a chance to develop my role-playing chops until I played Storyteller Systems, until I played, through Vampire. And then I played Mage. And then somewhere in there, I played Werewolf, and eventually Wraith and Changeling. But I played all the major ones. I played before Mummy was around, and I don't think I would probably play Mummy today. But But that's not to say that it's probably not a great game. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure people love it. Be you, do whatever it is that we don't splat shame here. So if you want to go play Mummy, go play Mummy. But yeah, we'll be back on stream Thursday with Stealing Immortality. It'll be a ton of fun, and you'll get a chance to go out and grab it. Yes. I also recently picked up the special edition Wraith 20th. I have the Wraith 20th. I already have it. It's back there. It's an enormously huge book. And the reason why I got the special edition one, not only was it criminally cheap over at IPR, and the book is so much thinner. So like, let me see if I can find it. It's not within reach. I can't find it without upsetting the apple cart here. So, well, maybe I can. Okay. So this is the standard 20th anniversary edition Wraith, right? Okay. So, yep. Here's how thick it is. Extra thick, like we like it. We are down with the thickness in this house. It is roughly about 500 pages, give or take, right? The other one, the one which is the Stygian edition, one that Networked is talking about in chat, is just easier to handle at the table, and I think that it's going to be very interesting to get a chance to crack that open. It's also got, and I don't remember if both versions of them have the comic. There's the comic in the front of it, right? So Wraith is a game about what happens after you die and sort of what keeps you around. It's about way more than that, but it's a really interesting World of Darkness game. And I think that let me go out on a limb here. I think Wraith might be one of the most hopeful World of Darkness games. I know it's going to sound counterintuitive, but it's not, trust me. I think there is a lot of potential hope in Wraith, in the sense that you have the opportunity to, after you die, stay around and figure out why you're still here. What is keeping you here? How do you change those things? How do you affect those things? So yeah, I just had to shout out the Wraith book because it came up in Stream of Consciousness. But yeah, so Stealing Immortality, as far as the VTM stream goes, that's sort of getting closer towards the end of the first season. And I say the first season because I have a feeling that people are going to want us to continue to play it. I have that feeling. I have a feeling people aren't going to just want to let go of the ghoulies anytime soon. So, and they're a great group, and we have a lot of fun together. And that's my benchmark now, right? So my benchmark now for games is not, hey, we would really like it if you played X game, right? And it could be some publisher, or it could be some, some spokesperson or person that works for a publisher. My benchmark is, do we enjoy it? Are we having fun? That could be anything. It could be playing Shadowrun. It could be playing anything. As long as we're having a good time, we're going to play it, right? Because I think life is just way too short to get sucked into playing games that you don't want to play, right? So I got one other thing in the rundown that I want to get to you. I know I talked about it on your weekly warm-up this week, but I put a link in chat. Let me talk about this really quick. You'll see a change. Watch this fancy stream stuff going on here. So we at the Old Ways created a team for Make Your Mark. It's a virtual challenge, right? 6 miles in 6 days to help end lupus. Now, May is Lupus Awareness Month, but this doesn't get going until next month. And some of us have been working really hard lately at trying to be a little bit more active. And I know that, like, my own personal cardio regimen is going to make this sort of like super easy, right? But that's not the point. It's not about me. It's about the event. And so what I am asking you to consider is consider joining Team Old Ways for this specific event. It's 6 miles in 6 days. It's not running, it's walking, it's jogging, it's however you want to do it. And then the idea is to get people interested, to get people willing to donate, because lupus is a super complex and hard to define challenge. It strikes a lot of people without warning. It also targets mostly women between the ages of 15 and 44. And it's not that it's not that men or children are spared, right? But it's just normally hits women. Symptoms can be severe, highly unpredictable. They can damage any organ or tissue, from skin to joints, heart, kidneys, etc. It's all here on this page. And I think that one of the last lines is sort of the most critical. There are only 3 drugs that have been developed and approved by the USDA specifically to treat lupus, which, you know, is another challenge given the current times. I'll just leave it out there, the current times. But I would love to have anyone who's willing sign up for the team and help us raise money for in June, 6 miles in 6 days. If you're willing and able, that would be super awesome. So I left the link there. It's in chat now. I'll actually push the link out a couple of different times. And what I can also do is do this. Watch this. I can just pin it. Look at that. It's fancy. It's almost as if I know what I'm doing. And I don't, but I'm going to try. So it's something we got involved with. So a fellow cast member and friend and someone we deeply love and appreciate, Fiery Ashes, over on her streamed all last week during GoTel in an effort to fight and find a cure for lupus. She did 24 hours of continuous streaming, which is just sort of mind-boggling from the guy who usually jumps on and does like 3 hours. Like, she's an absolute powerhouse and a rock star. And I don't think she gets enough credit, but she raised, I want to say her channel raised like $1,200, which is amazing. And so kudos to her and her folks that helped raise that money. We just want to do our part. And so this is kind of along the lines of like when it comes to what the Old Ways does is that responsibility portion. So when you have a platform, you're responsible, I think, to make sure that you're doing what you can to improve and add to people's happiness or comfort, right? It's the same reason why we get behind local charities, local LGBT plus charities like the Liam Foundation. It's why we've worked with the folks at the Travel Project. It's why we've stood up and did streams to feed children through the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. It all matters, right? The era of silence is over. It has been over, but it is over. So, because that is the world we want to build. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now, and I'm going to go back to this screen, but check out the team if you get a chance. So, let's talk about world building, shall we? Let's talk about it. Okay. So when I think about world building, I think a lot about onion layers because I think, hey, thanks, Rabel. I think that it's super important to think about world buildings from the outside in. I think it's easiest to take almost like a 30-mile view of the place that you're going to. And I want to be a little bit specific here when I talk about it. I think there are ways we can talk about world building in existing places already, like Delta Green or like the Call of Cthulhu universe, depending upon whatever area you're in, or you could talk about it in the sense of really any modern game. I think what I want to talk about as far as world building is more ground up stuff. So a mud ball that has no definition, that is something you entirely give a million colors to help help it exist as a space. That's sort of the perspective that I'm coming to this from. So we have to discuss and talk about what's important when we talk about world building, and that could be just as a foundation. We have to define scope, tone, and then the overall and overarching identity of the location. So that's going to be like whether or not we choose between a single continent or multiple continents, what levels of magic or technology are going to be available, the central premise. This is something where, like, I think it's really super easy to miss the boat. And I'll bring up an example that I have been reading and looking into recently. And that is this tiny, tiny, tiny little book. So this, let me hide my face. You can see where the lighting is obviously in this room. This is Shadow Dark. So it's a tiny book, right? It's a fantasy game. It's a dark fantasy game. Ooh, spooky. But point being is this game has something that is a little unlike a lot of other games. And I think that a gentleman that I ran into at Chaosium Con back in April said, it's a gimmick. He said it's a gimmick. So Shadow Dark's gimmick is that torches, while you are in Shadow Dark is in and of itself essentially a dungeon crawl game. So it's about getting together a bunch of people and then crawling down into some weird place or going into some weird area and finding treasure and beating back the darkness and trying to succeed without dying. But the gimmick that Matt Ryan was talking about, the guy I talked to, the Matt Ryan, sorry, put some respect on Matt Ryan's name. He's an amazing map maker. He said it's a gimmick, Mike. The torch thing is a gimmick. So the torch thing he's referring to is you set a timer, a real world timer, when someone lights a torch. It lasts an hour. And that's it. And once the torch goes out, every round you roll for wandering monsters. Not every minute, not every 10 minutes, not every hour, every round. Oh, and by the way, no one has dark vision. And all the monsters can see in the dark, naturally. And so it puts the characters on a clock, right? And I think that I agree with Matt that it is a gimmick, but I don't think that it's a bad one, if that makes sense. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. That's what life's about. I think that it's okay for games to use gimmicks because sometimes they're fun. Other times they're not. But I think that when you analyze and sit down and play a game and you go, what is the thing about general gaming? Like if I'm doing fantasy gaming, what is the thing that I don't like? I can name one thing I don't like. One of the things that I don't like is the connection between killing monsters and getting XP. Like I fundamentally disagree with it. But that's because I've been sort of ruined by the storyteller system in that regard, or like even, for that matter, even like Shadowrun, because you don't get karma, their version of XP for killing people. You get it for completing missions, and sometimes if there are high value targets, if part of the mission is to take that person out, you certainly can get karma rewards for that. But I love the idea of games that decouple XP from killing, because it removes the, sort of blood makes the grass grow, kill mentality that a lot of gamers have. And frankly, I think it can sort of ruin a lot of people to games, because when you're talking about a collective storytelling setting, or you're talking about a collective game setting, when you're doing that at a convention and there are 3 people at the table who all they want to do is murder everything in sight, then the person who doesn't, if there is a person at the table who just wants to experience playing in a fantasy setting, they're going to feel like, oh, well, I have to do this too. There's going to be a lot of peer pressure, right? Or they're going to stand up and say, wait a minute, why are we doing this? And then the people who are much more into that sort of thing, well, they're going to make that person feel a little bit uncomfortable, I think. So that's the thing that I don't like about fantasy gaming. And so I'm working on fixing it. Long story, but I digress. So I think Shadow Dark is an excellent example of how you can take something that sounds like a gimmick and you can make it into something that creates some sort of level of intensity. Yeah, so in chat we get, that's why I love Call of Cthulhu. If you kill someone or something, you have to deeply deal with it. Yeah, absolutely. I love that too. Same thing I love about that in Delta Green. The sanity mechanic is something that has been argued about for a really long time, as far as whether or not it should be the way it is. There are people out there who deeply disagree with the sanity mechanic for a lot of reasons, and that's okay. They're welcome to. They can disagree with it, but I think one of the things that I enjoy about decoupling those things is it's a natural way to tell players you can't kill your way out of this, right? Like if the advancement, sorry, let me step back. You can't kill your way to advancement. I think that's probably a better way to say it. I don't want players to think that they can do that. And so if I'm doing world building, then I'm absolutely going after the idea that I want to have a second look at how we give out experience points. That's more setting. That's more system than it is setting. So that's just me being ranty. So let's define, if we can, a world's core concept. I think that's where we got to start. So what makes a world unique? There's a lot of things examples we could use, right? So if we use an example like Shadowrun, the setting of that world is originally set in 2050. There have been multiple plagues, multiple horrible viral plagues that have crushed the human population. The world has been reinfused with magic, and technology has advanced to the point where people are beginning and successfully physically altering their body with cybernetics. Oh yeah, by the way, there are dragons. I mean, just wild stuff, right? So like you think about that and you think about how much the world has just totally changed. If we look at Call of Cthulhu, let's say the 1920s, just as an era example, if we take that world and we say the world of Call of Cthulhu is a setting which shows that there are things humans do not understand, and worse, not only do they not understand them, these things deeply hate humanity, and they are looking to change humanity, whether by consuming them, altering them, transmuting them in some fashion to have a level of control over the world that they do not already have. And it's all a big ramp up until, good old Cthulhu wakes back up and then ends the world, essentially. Which, may or may not happen, but the idea is that it's a investigative horror game where you go looking in dark places and then those dark places look back at you. And it's your fight to keep your sanity however long you can. Right, so those are some examples. So if we were building a world, chat, I'll just ask chat. There's a few people here. If we were building a world, what's a one unique thing that you think would make a great fantasy world? That was something unique about it. Like, imagine a fantasy world where the waking world is directly shaped by people when they fall asleep. That's just a thought. So you go to sleep one night, you have a weird dream. And you have a weird dream that you're in a market and you're shopping with someone and you are buying and selling bits and pieces of somebody's body. And when you wake back up, you realize that that now is part of the reality here. And it could be that you wake up and it's just completely accepted. And that the world is so strange that everybody is used to it being constantly changed on a daily basis. I think it might be a little too out there for people to really grasp. I don't know how you would do that mechanically. We don't have to get into that. But I think that the thing when you world build, what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, why would I want to play in this world? What makes it interesting? What makes it different than any others? So if you're taking a fantasy world, you're going to have to tackle a couple of things, right? So the people who live there, how they interact with one another, and then you have the fight against good old Tolkien, as he is one of the most prolifically read fantasy authors in history, at least in the 20th and 21st century. You're going to say words and people are going to go, oh, I know what that looks like, because their word association in their brain's already there. We can fight against that. I'll tell you how. I think when you're world building, you can start at 30,000 feet, but it might be easier to start in a single city. So establishing your scope when it comes to world building means that you have to have a handle on what you're willing to put together. Okay, so Network's got a quick idea. People are given days of life based on the joy and happiness they give. Make someone happy, upset, lose days. Make someone happy, gain some days. Each time you give joy, it slowly diminishes how much time it gives. On the other hand, every time you make someone upset, it takes more and more days away. The hook is some people have been discovered that work exactly opposite, making them terrorists, the good-natured people. Yeah, no, I think that's cool. So like in my idea where a world is where dreams are shaped, dream-shaped reality would be someone is discovered and that they don't dream. And that when they wake, that they see reality for what it is, which could just be horrifying. This horrifying series of misbegotten shapes that their world is made into, right? So they're walking around and the world is changing like putty and no one else sees it, right? Like the walls and the windows bleed and all sorts of just crazy stuff. Or you could completely go the dark city angle, right? Like, so the place you're in is constantly shifting and changing. No one else sees it. Everybody else accepts it, but you. Yeah, absolutely. So that's some interesting ideas, right? All this is just to like get the brain cooking and thinking. That's really all we're doing, right? And then we want to determine the balance, right? So realism versus fantasy. How grounded or how whimsical is the world? And I think that we've seen that play out here, like on the show. So we can see how grounded a game like, I know this is going to sound strange, but Vampire is by comparison to Changeling. So if you listen to our Changeling series, that show is just sometimes bonkers, but it's supposed to be. That's the theme of it. It's lighthearted. It's fun. It's different. And most of our Vampire games are not lighthearted. They are still fun in a way, but they're not necessarily nice shows. I think there's a redeeming quality when it comes to some of the stuff that we did on Whispers of Lost with James running that game. Okay, and then we want to consider the role of magic, technology, or other systems. Are they central or are they peripheral? So in a fantasy world, many times technology sort of sits at the periphery because all of the juice is sort of given to the idea that there are people out there and they can do magic and they can do wild stuff. You can certainly have both. So you can have high technology and high magic. A perfect example of that setting would be Numenera by Monte Cook Games. There's a setting that has, it's set 1 billion years in the future. There were, so many different iterations of mankind or humanity, as it were, that, at one point in the history, humans left Earth completely, just packed it in and said goodbye, and then came back at some point after someone else had settled the planet, which sort of gives you an idea of how long that story is. But certainly high magic, certainly high technology. I think those settings can be fun, certainly. I think if I'm looking at traditional fantasy, I think part of my core gamer being still harkens back to like sort of the original games I had with Dungeons and Dragons, where you don't really have anything more complex than like a crossbow. I think when we were young, we sort of joked and looked at the arquebus, right, as this fantastic thing that we always wanted to get, but we never had enough gold to buy one, or we could never find one. I like my fantasy games for the most part without guns, because I think guns fundamentally change just where you're at on the scale of fantasy. I think that that's true when you talk about stuff like Call of Cthulhu too. So there's a great parallel here when it comes to 20s Call of Cthulhu, where guns change everything that happens in a regular combat, in a quote non-mythos creature combat. So if you're talking about guns and people have pistols, that's one thing. But when somebody in Call of Cthulhu has a rifle or a Thompson or something like that, and there's automatic gunfire, everything changes. The whole thing gets different. And so you have to have, when you world build, you really have to watch the technology dial and not turn it up too much. Because once you give players too much technology, there's always potential issues. You're calling out the elephant gun. Oh, Allie has joined us. I see. Hello, Allie. Yeah. So I would be happy to call it the elephant gun. I mean, if Morgan's still here, she can certainly speak to it. So I think that the cool thing about the elephant gun, though, is, at least in Call of Cthulhu, is that the reload time is really crappy on it. Right? So there's some mitigation there. The difference between that and the Thompson is that you get a drum magazine and you get 50 rounds. And yeah, there's no way you're going to sneak around with a drum of 50 rounds, because that Thompson with the drum, it was like carrying around a gunny sack of quarters. But the difference being is that, the elephant gun does a lot of damage to one target. Well, we'll go ahead and allow that. When you use the coarse language, Bramble, Twitch makes me okay your post. You sure you want Bramble saying that? It's fine. It's no big deal. So I think those are the things you got to consider. So I have some interactive questions for you. So I'm gonna go a little slower now. I'm gonna ask some questions, and we'll put sort of some time on the clock, except that there is no clock. What's one core idea that you'd love to base a fantasy world around? I'm going to stick to fantasy at this point. We'll get to some of the other stuff later if we have a chance. What's one core idea that you'd love to base a world on, or you'd love to see a fantasy world based around? Gives me the opportunity to hydrate. I know mine, but I'll wait. Oh, mysterious powers. Okay. All right, Tifa. A mysterious power source. I like that. I'm going to write that down. Mysterious power source. Like mysterious. I'm going to ask you to expand on it a little bit. Like mysterious, like we don't know where it comes from, or mysterious, like we know that it's there. We just don't know how to explain it. Okay. All right, Miss Emmylou. Immortality. So the core idea of it would be immortality. Like, I guess expand on it if you can. Immortality in what way? Like, how is that like that everybody is immortal and nobody dies? Okay. Paranormal entities came out, so to speak, during the American Civil War or alternate history. Yeah, I agree with Commodore Skip 100% here, Bramble. What you're talking about is Ghost Rock, and what you're talking about is Deadlands. And I love Deadlands, but that's a very, very, very Deadlandsy scene there. Okay, so now we're back to immortality. Immortality has to be earned. Okay, so in that sort of core idea, people know that you can become immortal, right? People know that you can become immortal, but they can earn it. Interesting. Oh, Bramble, do you not know what Deadlands is? Oh, you were in for a treat. So Deadlands is an amazingly fun game. Was originally made, I think, by Pinnacle Entertainment. Don't quote me on that, though. And it's a what if scenario when it comes to the Civil War. And it's got Ghost Rock, like Skip was talking about, and it powers stuff. Sometimes it can be made into bullets, it can be made into machines, and it can do all sorts of stuff. And it's super dangerous. And the first edition of Deadlands, you played with poker chips and cards and stuff. That's how characters. Yeah, you would know, right? You would know. Skip would know who created it. Vampires. Okay. Hello, Rena. Made a fantasy world. Rena made a fantasy world. Flip the script on good and evil, where the vampires and monsters aren't evil. It's humans that are the problem. You know what? I agree with that interpretation. I think that it's a fine interpretation when you think about how likely it is that humans are the problem, like the core of the problem. And I think that this also sort of changes too. It messes with it disrupts the idea, the standard fantasy idea, right? So when we disrupt core ideas, we make people do one thing when they read our fantasy, where they read our world, right? They make people stop. Wait, what? And they make them think about it, right? So there are a lot of games that do that, and some do it better than others. Not every game does it, but I think it's important to have a reader, when they take in that first page of setting material, you need to be able to stop them cold and have them go, wait, what did I read? Because if you can't, then you're likely going to have someone do the thing that people do, which is they take a book and put it down. That's not what you want to do. But these are all really cool concepts. I like the idea of that. I like the immortality idea too, because if immortality can be earned, then the question is who holds the keys to immortality? Can it be stolen? Sorry for the plug there. And moreover, do the people who hold on to the ability to grant immortality or to be gained, is there something that they want in exchange? And so you can set up like a tiered system, which sets up conflict. And like, ultimately, of course, I'm the sort of person that doesn't necessarily want that sort of a system set up because it can lead to abuse and stuff like that. But what we're looking for is conflict, drama, story. And so if there's no one to sort of, fight against, there's no one to pull against, then everybody's hunky dory, and we can't have that, because then, what fun is it? Okay. Good answer from chat. I appreciate the interactivity for sure. I have one second question here on the first topic point, which is world building. Would you rather build a world that is one continent or multiples? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a poll, because I think polls would be fun. So one continent or I'll flip the script a little bit. I'll make the poll for 5 minutes. We can talk about it and start the poll. One continent or a multiverse of continents. So totally vote in the poll. I think that there are benefits to both. If I told the writers, the professional writers here who are in chat with us, if I told them that they had to build a multiverse worth of setting material, they would probably cry. I mean, I know I would. But you could say the same thing about a continent, depending upon how detailed you want to get. I actually prefer setting out some basic ground rules and some basic setting material, and then developing what's there with the players. Like in a real fantasy setting, I enjoy world building directly at the table. I like the idea of players building maps and players having a hand in what's in the world, geographically speaking. I mean, they're not going to sit around and like drop, well, there's a tower here that's totally unlocked that has a ton of magical items in it. No, you're not doing that. But you could totally put the tower in there, and you can totally say that there's probably something in there. I'll worry about filling in the details, bub. You just go to the tower. But I truly enjoy that. I think that there's an advantage to sitting with players at the table, especially if you're going to be investing time long term with people. Build it together, right? Because they're going to get ownership, and that's okay. Don't be scared to let other people have ownership over the world that you're building, because they can get jazzed up about it and they can get interested, and then it's not all your energy. So right now, 7 votes in our poll. Good times. Y'all are crazy. Okay. So I think there's benefits to having a multiverse too. I think that there are benefits. The benefits would be is that you can go a lot of places. You can do a lot of different things. You could hop back and forth, and you could affect different places. You could choose to have a ton of different things happen. We're going to get ads in about 3 minutes, and I'm actually not going to snooze them this time because they happen. We can just get past them. You could create a world without capitalism. If you only have one continent, what do characters wonder about? I think that's fair. I think that's a good question. So I think there's a lot of things they could wonder about. I think it matters how much of the world is known. So if you take a continent like Africa, which I got to tell you, fam, is way bigger than the maps that portrayed it to us for years. It's enormous. And wasn't too long ago, in the not so distant past, not a whole lot of people knew what the hell was there. Right? And they made a bunch of assumptions. Not that we're not really good about making assumptions, But just the idea being is that you could have one continent, which is exceptionally large, and it could have most of its cities or villages that are tucked into coastal areas. So you got to figure too, like there are some very specific drivers. Hello, Courtney. Thank you for looking. Um, there are some very specific drivers when it comes to people, right? People need really three things when you're talking about setting up civilizations. If we're talking about a standard fantasy, not non-high technology world, um, people need access to material to make shelter. They need access to food, right? And they need access to fresh water and reasonably okay temperatures, right? So if you're down south somewhere and it is broiling hot all the time, and not that anyone would be living in an environment like that, it's going to be a little tougher at first, right? But there are going to be some benefits, right? So the cooler months are going to be, a little less difficult, because the average temperature is always going to be a little bit higher. Up north, it's going to be a little harder, depending upon how the world is constructed, a little harder because the world's certainly going to freeze you out sometimes. All right, so we're going to get ads here in about 5 seconds. That's okay. I'm not going to take a break. I'm just going to chill here with you, and we won't go too far. At least not terribly far. So the winner of the poll is the continent, 5 votes. So fabulous. One continent. Your AC has failed and to work again, and you're suffering. I believe it. I was thinking about the air conditioner here today, just because, it's what you think about. It's not warm here. It's not warm enough here not really any stretch to kick it on anytime soon. But where I live in the Midwest, it's one of those places where 1 week it could be perfectly reasonable. So we have what I call sneaky spring. Spring here in the Midwest is sort of like just a couple of different ways. It's really like 50s and mostly rainy, or you'll get a few days like we had today, which was like 70 and like mostly sunny. And those are great. And then out of the blue, it will suddenly be 88 degrees. And you will turn everything into a broil. And those of y'all, and I say y'all lovingly, who are from the South in the United States, you are more used to the heat and humidity than we are. And so, no, I'm not interested. I'm not interested at all. Yeah, I think my preferred environment might be like Norway or maybe Scotland. I think that might be my preferred environment. So, Skip, it's chilly at the beach. Well, aren't you lucky? You're at the beach. Hopefully the beach is treating you well. Kit, you're a transplant? That's fantastic. We're still in ads for another minute. We're still in ads. We'll move on in a second here. Yeah. That sounds like nice weather in the Bay, Reno. Oh, okay. You grew up in Northwest Indiana, so what, like Valpo? What else is in Northwest Indiana? I don't know my Indiana geography. That's mostly a state I try to avoid because of political reasons. Indiana's special. Oh, Northwest, right? Not Northeast. Gary, yeah. Whiting. Oh, okay. All right, we are back from ads. So thank you for our weather talk. Now we'll move it along. Okay, so continent 1. I think it's a really interesting choice. I think it's a really interesting choice when we talk about a setting. So if we're going to say it's a fantasy setting, we're going to say it's a continent. The next question is what's a setting trope that you are tired of in fantasy worlds? What is the thing that when you read about a fantasy world, even if it's urban fantasy, which is fine, or if it's modern in some fashion fantasy, what is the trope that when you read about it in a fantasy world, you're like, light it on fire. I am done. I'm tired. I know what mine is. So one of the tropes that I despise in fantasy settings is that elves live a billion D in 11 years. I'm really tired of long-lived elves. I'm also tired of like elves being super uber smart and just knowing everything because they've been around for 6 billion years. I just think it's overplayed. All right. So Tifa says, yeah, orc evil, human good. Yeah. I think that some of the old information when it comes to that sort of stuff on how orcs and humans and the alignment tree, as it were, it does a disservice. Yeah, I think the alignment portion of fantasy gaming can be tough. I get why some of it's there, right? So like, it's a little different in DCC, and a little different. You know, it's law, chaos, etc. Um, I think that evil races. I think it's a broad generalization, right? But I also think at the same time, even though it's a generalization, I think that that is one of the things that is cool about characters like Drizzt from Forgotten Realms, because you know he was at the time when he was written in the 80s. He's this drow who isn't that terrifyingly evil, you know, servitor of Loth, and he's not. He just wants to be. He really just wanted to be left alone. He just wanted to grow up and appreciate his mom and dad, but that didn't happen for him. But I agree that it would be it's a broad generalization to call an entire race evil. It sets up sort of like it sets up the world to act a specific way. And that can be very difficult to deal with. So Skip mentions resurrection is commonplace. Oh yeah. I think resurrection should be like a 1 in a million thing. So Glorantha has this same sort of ideal when it comes to resurrection, where they have roles you can make for something called divine intervention, where you can be divinely intervened on by your behalf of your chosen, your chosen god or goddess, dependent upon what your need is at the time. But if we're talking like a sort of a AD&D sort of resurrection, I do think that the scope of what they have done with the product line has leaned towards the idea that characters should be really difficult to kill. And for me, that is sort of one of the reasons I had to eject myself from what Hasbro had done to the game. Beyond the fact that they're I have so many things. We could put an entire stream full of things that I don't like about them and the things that they've done. But I do think there has to be a cost. And I don't think you should bring people back from the dead if there's no cost, because then what's the point? Right? I think a great example of this in Call of Cthulhu is the ability to spend X number of points of luck in a pulp game and survive, right? And you have like that, Indiana Jones slips off the cliff at the end, near the end of Last Crusade, and everybody thinks he's dead, and he's like hanging onto this branch, and then he gets up and he walks over and he's looking down over the cliff. Like I love that stuff, but there's a cost to it. It doesn't matter how many points of luck you have. I mean, in our game, in our Masks series, I can't remember the number of points that Jack Doyle burned when he had to burn his luck to survive, but it was I think if memory serves correctly, it was like 60 or 70 points. It was just a truckload. He had enough points to do it, and he did it, and he survived. I think it should be like that. I think it should be detrimental, right? I think that's a good point, Skip. So Ellie mentions magic always so easily accessible. So I think you have that dial, right? So you have a dial when you create a world that says, how much magic do I want it to have in it? And sort of that secondary underdial is, how easy is it for someone to get a hold of it? So a lot of fantasy settings don't really talk about the barrier of entry when it comes to magic, especially in the traditional sense. I think that is something that there should be a discussion. I remember some of the first games when I dealt with magic users, and as the character that I was playing did not have any ability to access magic, and so everything they do looks a little bit strange, right? The verbal and somatic components, and this dude over here is pulling out twigs and breaking them, or ripping leather in half, and they're throwing herbs all over the place, and suddenly things are happening. There's sort of a bit of frivolity to it, I think, when you talk about all the different components. I remember the original identify spell, when identifying magical items, right? It was like you need a pearl, and you need a feather or whatever, and you need to smash the pearl up. So it's pearl, it's got to be worth 100 gold pieces, and you got to smash it up, and then you got to do this thing. And so we devised that you needed a mortar and pestle, and you smashed the pearl, and then you made some sort of like milky concoction, and the wizard was drinking this pearl, and that his insides changed, and that's what allowed him to understand the properties of this magical item. But I do think that magic being too accessible tips the balance of a world. And I am for spellcasting costs. I think that it's important for magic to cost people things. I love the way that Call of Cthulhu does parts of their system of casting spells, right? There's no freebies. Not unless you're using specific rules. There's nothing that is easy about magic. It's all costly. It all will ruin you. I think that very much typifies that setting. And so when we're world building, we have to decide on what kind of magic we want to have, and then how it's going to affect other things. So that's some really good points there. So Rena mentions the idea that species all have specific traits no matter who the character is. Elves are wise and mysterious. Hobbits are happy and hungry. Dwarves are greedy and drink all the time. Yeah, absolutely. So these are terrible setting tropes. And I think they're perfectly okay for one setting. And that would be the setting that Tolkien writes, right? And probably some of the original D&D settings, because they are essentially basically lifted from him. But I think that if you're putting together a fantasy setting now, and you do not make reasonable alterations to the races that are playable, right, and the way that they interact, and the way that they have evolved, and how they view the world, if you're not making real changes, why are you building a setting at all? You're just offering the same stuff. Like, again, the idea at the core is to make something that's compelling. I want you to read something that I wrote and stop and go, oh, wow, that's cool. Or, why did they do that? Like, you don't have to agree with me. You might read it and go, yeah, I don't like this. And that's fine. But I want you to be able to stop and say, oh, that's neat. That's different. Like, I loved the idea, as I sort of said at the top of stream, I love the idea of music. It's sort of a core part of who I am as a person. And so when I wrote Time of the Serpent, I loved the idea of I loved the idea of taking the records, right? So original, we'll just say vinyl, quote unquote, wasn't vinyl. It was this material called shellac, and the records were way thicker in that era than they are now. I loved the idea that someone would go to the ends of the earth to like carefully inscribe spells into the shellac ridges in this record, and that you could play it and you could create some sort of terrifying music that would mystically affect people. I think that's interesting. It's different. It's probably not unique because I don't really believe there are a whole lot of unique ideas out there because of so many people thinking and writing. And that's okay. Ideas don't have to be unique, but they do have to be complete, right? So I think we're always looking for those sort of ideas. It doesn't have to be a showstopper. What we want to do is make someone stop and think. Or ideally, we want them to think, oh, hey, I got a really cool character idea. That's what I want. I want to light a match on somebody's head and then say, I'm going to make a character like this. This is interesting. Which sort of dovetails really nicely into culture, society, and history. So a fantasy world feels most alive through its people, right? Their culture and their shared history. So a wonderful example of this is Glorantha. If there is one thing that is true about that setting, more than any other, is that you can just absolutely put the hip waders on and go swimming in the sea of lore, because that game's got it, and it's got it in buckets. In fact, as somebody who has run a little bit of RuneQuest, I would contend that I think RuneQuest has a lore problem, but that's probably a topic for another day. I think there is such a thing as too much lore. I think that there is such a thing as having your fantasy world so built up and so in depth that it feels like, Feist or Sanderson or somebody else has been, dropping lore bombs in your setting material. I think it's a problem. And it's one that we can totally tackle. We just have to control the pen a little bit. So the topic is more broad and a little less specific, but we want to focus on how those people interact and the different people who live in different spaces and places, right? So when you present, I think it's really sort of some of the, back to some of the topic we talked about previously, right? We're talking about making sure that all hobbits are happy and hungry, etc. I never want that to be true. I don't want all humans to be one way. I don't want all humans to be, we're agile and we are great at adapting. You know what? I got to tell you something. There are some humans fucking suck at adapting. They're terrible at it. Humans hate change. It is in the core of our being to want things to be the same, generally, because the inside here, there's this little brain here that tells us that something that has symmetry, something that is the same every day, is safety. Now, there are tons of people out there, sometimes myself included, who fight against that, right? We want change. We want things to move and alter and be free flowing. But I think you could argue that it would be better if, in a fantasy setting, if the races that are playable don't have big like attribute changes based on who they are, right? Was it cool in certain D&D games if you pick up extra abilities because you're a human? Hey, I'm super adaptable and I get extra powers because of it. Sure, but isn't that just sort of like a throwaway thing? Aren't you just sort of placating them? Well, we gave elves, low light, or we gave them this, or we gave them this. We got to give humans something. Do you? Not necessarily. But that sort of brings me back to the idea that I don't think games have to be balanced to be fun. Yeah, sorry to hear about that, Bramble. I would just say if someone is flying that specific flag, they're probably a product of their upbringing and their environment. That's a unfortunate thing. So when we talk about cultures, societies, I mentioned Glorantha because it has had a ton of work done to it. It has a ton of work done with it, and the world is amazingly developed. And there are benefits to that. There are touchstones, visual and written, that are great about it. I think the thing that captivated me most about Glorantha, just right off the bat, was the art. And I loved the diversity of cultures that were already present in the world. And I think the thing that stands out about Glorantha is a quote that I heard someone say, and I can't remember who it is. I would attribute them if I could. They said that the world of, the Fellowship of the Ring and the Hobbit and stuff like that, where Tolkien was a linguist. And so it was a fantasy world created by somebody who was first focused on language, right? And the process therein. Glorantha was written by, for the most part, in the beginning, by Greg Stafford. Greg was a shaman. That was his vocation, right? Spiritually. And that fundamentally changes the way the world is shaped, right? And so it gives us a unique look at a fantasy world. And I think the people who were involved in building it and their backgrounds and their lived experiences really do change what they built. There are people here in Channel who have created things that I dare say really only they could create. And that's a good thing. And I think that leaning into that is super important. Most of the fantasy games that I played as a teenager and even into young adulthood, say minus like games like Shadowrun, didn't really talk at all about any sort of indigenous people in any way, shape, or form. That wasn't present. The majority of the original fantasy D&D worlds are sort of, not even sort of whitewashed, they're pretty well whitewashed. Now, did they eventually come out with setting material which had different cultures? Yeah, sure, they did it. And you could point to some of the books that came out in AD&D, and you could say, well, this is a setting book that's about this type of culture, and I won't name what it is, but I don't think that's enough. I really think that if you're going to build a fantasy setting, or really any setting these days, you need a diverse group of writers to be able to speak to different cultures, especially if you're making up cultures from scratch. Because it's just not going to be the same. And you're going to falter. Even if you're somebody who is from somebody from a culture which is in the US would be a minority. You still need other voices because your lived experiences are very different. It doesn't mean you can't build stuff on your own. You certainly can. There are examples that are already out there, right? And good examples. And I'm in no way saying that those folks shouldn't build those worlds, but I really think the best teams, when you're talking about world building, are built of many different people from different places and different lived experiences. So when we talk about crafting distinct cultures, which is really what we're doing, we need to discuss a culture's value system, what traditions they have, and then what are their natural conflicts. So I'll give you an example. In Glorantha, if we take the Sardarite people, who are, I would say by de facto, as you open most Glorantha pieces, they are sort of your de facto people that you would play. You would play a Sardarite. They live in Dragon Pass. Depending on the timeline, will depend on, who's in control of Dragon Pass. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Tifa, I agree. it is impossible not to be biased by your own environment and surroundings if you try not to. Yeah, because it's what you know, right? So if we look at Sartorites in Glorantha, one of the things that we see is that they are a proud and sort of fiery people. They're super puffed up, and they love their family, and they are, they carouse and they party and they love openly, and they're a very passionate people, right? And many of the different parts of their culture are explained. They're very tribal. They're separated into tribes, and they're separated further into clans, and there's a certain breakdown of them based on where they live and what they do and their vocations. And then each tribe has its own traditions, but there are major traditions within the Sartorite people, and they have a ton of conflicts. They have a ton of conflicts internally. They have a ton of conflicts when it comes to external folks. So if you are listening to our segments for RuneQuest Glorantha, you're hearing some of those conflicts come up. You're going to naturally butt heads with folks like the Lunars, who are occupying Dragon Pass right now, and our characters are having to deal with them as best they can, which I think is fun. And it is also a challenge for them, because many of them in their backgrounds have, I want to say, a baked in hatred, but it comes as part of their character's upbringing, their character story, right? They have been on the receiving end of being occupied. And that alone in our current day and age is a difficult topic, because that's going on right now. And so you can take touchstones from that and understand and show parallels and sort of examples of how that can be understood in present day versus a fantasy setting. So we have those cultures, we have those traditions, we have those values. So we got to think about that when we build a people. That's really what we're doing. And then you got to do it every single time for every separate race you're going to put on that world, because orcs are going to go through the same thing, right? Goblins, kobolds, dragons, they're all going to go through that. And no one culture is usually an island, right? So they're going to bounce off, they're going to ricochet off other races. So if I say a war happened here, whoa, okay, who was involved? Why did it happen? There's a ton of, like, a million questions. Or I could say a mystical event happened in the sky at this year, and a star came down from the heavens and it landed in a lake. And after it landed in the lake evaporated because of the heat. And then whoosh, there was this standing stone that was 150 meters high, that was completely impenetrable. I make this world-changing, eye-popping thing happen. Every culture, every race of people that are around that for a certain radius are going to be affected by what just happened. They're all going to have different perspectives on it. They're all going to have different thoughts. And you have to at least give like a nugget, a couple lines, a paragraph maybe, about those instances. So that way, when you have a new player or reader approach the text and they read about your wonderful history that has just grabbed them, well, what did the elves think of this? What did they do? How did they feel about how humans reacted to this, or what the humans chose to do? Like, those are little things that have to be thought of. They have to be considered, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to do the act of putting flesh on this skeleton, right? We all like our skeletons, and sometimes we like to see the, shined up, gleaming bones of the skeleton. But most times folks like to see a little flesh on the skeleton. And that's going to help us really do our next point, which is we need to define the historical timeline. So a world like Glorantha has thousands of years of history, thousands. And that can be really, really intimidating. Now, they have a section of time in Glorantha called God's time. where there's actually no recorded number. It just happened before time was a thing. So no one tracked anything because there's actually no way to track it. They're just some events that took place. And I think that was a really creative way that Greg said, hey, I want to tell a bunch of like setting information, but I don't want to have to make some massive timeline, right? I'm going to say some stuff happened over here in God's time. And then here is when actual recorded time started. Okay. We're going to have to, at the same time too, or as we develop that historical timeline, we're going to have to explore what power dynamics are there. So who holds power? How do societies clash or coexist while that power is being held? Right? Things to think about. And then I have some interactive questions now. If you could design one culture in a fantasy world, what's one unique tradition that they would have? So think about your own traditions or traditions from your culture, because we've got lots of different people here. Pick one tradition that you think would be interesting, that would be compelling. Give it to me in chat. Let's chop it up. Okay, Skip, define who they is. Just, is it humans, elves, dwarves, a race you're developing on your own? I do like the idea that they can speak with animals. So my follow-up question to that, Skip, is can the animals speak back to them? Like, do they speak common, basic, etc.? Or does this dog bark and suddenly they understand? Yeah, no problem. So the question, Tifa, is if you could design one culture for a fantasy world, what's one unique tradition that they would have? One unique tradition. So Kit says moots, regular, however many years, meetings of everyone from that culture who can make it. So I love the idea of traditional festivals as part of a whole host of reasons why people get together, right? We do that in our own culture. A lot of other cultures do it as well, and they do it for different reasons. And it could be to celebrate the passing of a season. It could be to mourn the loss of the dead from the previous year. It could be to turn the wheel and begin a new year. I think some of that is really cool. All right, Skip. Humans who have been teapots in a mountain tree or psychic. Okay. Oh, trapped. I like teapots though. I like the idea, Skip, that humans have become teapots in this mountain region, and that's how they speak to animals. I do see that you've changed it to trapped, but teapots is great. Art Rena, celebrating gender changes or gender understandings with feasts and celebrations. You realize you're a third gender. Party welcome to the tribe. Faye, realize you're a woman. Welcome party to. Yeah, okay, I like that. I like the idea, especially in Glorantha, that an initiation into adulthood could come in a lot of different ways. That's something I think, especially the Sixth Path stuff that was written about with Hortlings in Glorantha, that they did really, really well. And they sort of turn gender on its head for most of the fantasy worlds that are out there, which I think is great because it makes it more accessible. Anytime you can make a game more accessible to people, it's a win on multiple levels. So I do like the idea that I like the idea that you're adding in that it is celebrated, right? So the culture is celebrating the fact that someone else has come to an understanding about themselves. Because, and this could be because of lived experiences or learned experience within that culture, when so many of their people didn't understand who they were, that they had to set aside this time because it makes those people healthier to have the people that they live with accept who they are, and not only just accept, but celebrate who they are. So yeah, you bet. Okay. Bramble talks about ritualized drug use. Why am I not? I'm not surprised. But ritualized drug use is part of tons of cultures and has been for like thousands of years. So that's a really interesting touchstone. Also something that has parallels, parallels with our own histories. So parallels with our own histories mean that the idea that you're putting out there is gettable. People can grab onto it. And they go, oh, yeah, absolutely. Romans did that. Greeks did that. The Mayans did that. I mean, tons of other cultures did that. All right, Oni, I appreciate you stopping in. We know you're friends of friends, but it's cool to see you here. A neat cultural thing for society, adult naming, the idea that when you gain your adulthood, you get to choose your own name. As a child, your parents gave you your name, but when you are an adult, you determine who you are. I think that's fantastic. It's also something that you could do. You could ritualize the idea of putting that name to bed, so to speak. Like I could see that idea dovetailing into like a culture which saves the cribs that babies first sat in, and they sort of always keep that first crib somewhere, so that way when the child becomes an adult, they get to put their baby name to bed in sort of like one specific way, right? Oh, L5R. Yeah, I haven't played L5R in a long time, but was a fun game when I did play it. I've only played it like a handful of times, but I didn't delve too deep into it. But if that's in it, that's super cool. It's a great idea. So Tifa mentions a group of people who can talk to viruses and bacteria. Oh, wow. Imagine what a virus or bacteria might say back to you. That would be kind of wild. Thanks, Rena. Thanks for stopping on. I appreciate it. Love it. Love your face. Be safe. Okay. This is a great example of like just how the collective world building can work, and how we can spawn these different ideas. Okay. So second question here is, what's a historical event that you'd include in your world to make it feel epic? There's that word. I'm going to use that word, epic. Doesn't have to be epic fantasy, but the world has had some events that have happened in it which dramatically shift and change things. What is one historical event that you would include in a world to make it feel epic? Oh, no problem. Yeah. So Oni, the question is what's a historical event that you would include in your world to make it feel epic? Alrighty. Thanks for the alert, Callie. Tifa would include a great leader or warrior who fought against an entity and won. Ooh, an entity. I like your use of the word entity. And the reason why I like the word entity is because it doesn't really explain what it was. I like the idea that there's been an amazing historical battle, and because it's either been so long or because it was never truly given form and was never named, right? Nobody really knows what was fought against. They just know that it happened. And so we get to stretch our wings there a little bit, and we get to unfurl the mystery. And I think mysteries are great. Mysteries are great. Okay, Skip mentions the moon splits causing massive destruction. Okay, if that's any sort of, if we would take our moon as an example, if the moon splits and were to fall into Earth's gravitational well, which it likely would over time, there would be major destruction on planet. That's a whole lot of debris and mass coming down on our world. So yeah, you'd have a real fun time explaining what happened to the world. And then you'd have to decide too, would you be living in a dead world? Would the heat from the explosive force that would generate from that much matter hitting the earth or hitting the planet, would it burn up like, the arable land in a specific space? Maybe your earth would be dying and the people who are here were sort of just living out the last few days. That could be interesting. Bramble, digging too greedily into the deep and letting out things that weren't supposed to be. Yes, we will absolutely credit old gods. I think it's viable. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Don't necessarily have to be lurking elder things or whatever they are down there. You could do that with any sort of, and it doesn't have to be like a monster. It could just be something that humans are not prepared to contend with, right? Like ooze or giant slugs or whatever, right? The idea is that something happens and it transforms the world. So Oni said, a life defined by war, a world where everyone alive has only known war, but the current generation of people have finally negotiated peace. I think negotiated is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and I think that's really cool. So the idea is when you say negotiated, right? What you're saying is the people of the current generation are well aware of who was causing the war and what was causing it, and they have managed to negotiate peace, which means they came to a solution that the generation before them could not figure out. And they managed to figure it out. And so you'd have like a generation of people who were really willful and not likely to back down at all. So that's definitely puts an interesting sort of facet on. And then I guess like, what's the end game there, right? Or not end game. What's the jump off point for those characters? Is the characters who are playing in this world now, is their jump off point that their job is to keep the negotiated peace? And so they're constantly like running between multiple factions to try to keep the world from, diving headlong into fame and fortune and glory and war. Good question. All right. Tons of good answers there. I appreciate that. So now we will get to our poll question. I'm going to put up another poll up for y'all. And then we'll see where we're at after this. So the question is, should fantasy worlds focus on one dominant culture or many conflicting ones? I know my answer. I bet you do too. We'll make this a 3-minute poll because I bet it's going to go fast. Yeah, no, that's a great question too, right? So another follow up to that, Oni, is the party a group of old soldiers who now have to find a new life? Huh. Yeah, and imagine the new soldiers being totally, wholly, and completely turned away by the quote young generation because they're seen as the troublemakers, the people who couldn't solve the problem. There's a lot of aspects and parallels you can see to some of the current problems that we have here in the U.S., old versus new. One or many different cultures. Yeah. I'm going to vote in this one. Yeah. The trouble avoiders, right, Tifa? Yeah. So this is the same thing about the people who are silent, the silent consent, oh, it'll get better. I just won't say anything. You'd have a lot of those folks who said, well, I didn't want this to happen, but I didn't know what I could do to stop it. And so they just were milk toast, right? If you were telling a story, only would choose one culture at the risk of many cultures, risk of many cultures getting lost in the story and having them reduced to stereotype. Yeah. No, it's just fair to talk about the skill at storytelling, right? So when you're juggling 6 different cultures and there are traditions and facets within each one, you're doing a lot of work. If you are the only person at the table telling the story, then you're doing a ton of lifting on your own. And so in my experience, when we talk about establishing and doing world building with other people, which I think is something that helps lift the burden off of the main storyteller or the main writer, we are also engaging those people to say, oh, you are interested in developing this culture. Well, give me 3 traditions that they adhere to and tell me how they interact with these different races. You want them to help you tell that story because you can only come up with so many things on your own. Unfortunately, there is a limit to what your brain is able to handle, even if you've got a brain that can handle a ton. But that is, I think for me though, when it comes to the fantasy world should focus on one or many cultures. For me, it's many because I feel like a single culture becomes sort of like mono selective, right? Even if you bake stuff into the story that says, oh, your characters are going to be those who break the mold or you're going to be different from everybody for whatever game mechanic and or setting reason to show that you're set apart. I just think that there are too many in a continent setting, right? I think there's too much space. And I think that it's more likely that the people who develop there develop differently. See it all over Europe, see it all over the US, see it all over South America, really anywhere where there's distance between people. Cultures change. People do different things. I mean, that's just the way it is. Just give your head out. I appreciate it, sir. We weren't going to get to everything. I figured we would get through 2 or maybe 3 things, just to stream for a couple hours and to hang out with folks, and then maybe come back and do another world building session, maybe later in the month. But the idea was to sort of set our feet and look at some things. But what I was going to take a break, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm just going to hang. I think I'm good. I'm good. Okay. So let's see here. We'll get to point 3 and then we will go from there. So point 3 for me is magic or unique mechanics. So Allie brought this up a little earlier when she talks about magic being too accessible or too easy to get. We sort of need to define a setting's limits. So I used an example of this when I ran the first season of Children of the Periphery, our space adventure game. And we were running it in the Coriolis setting. And so if you're not familiar with Coriolis, it's a Free League product. And it is the tagline to get you familiar with it is essentially Arabian Nights in space. So it is a non-European based sci-fi adventure setting. And the original setting, I think, is fantastic. There's a lot of really good stuff in that setting. And I love that idea that there are people who are deeply religious. There are those who sort of genuflect toward it, but the worship of something they call the icons in that setting is core to the setting itself. It's directly connected to the character. And so we were doing the original session 0 for that. And I said to the players, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, with for a sci-fi setting, as far as the religious aspect, if one is something like Cyberpunk or something like Blade Runner, as far as the religious tones, and 10 is Kai Wynn from DS9, how religious do you want the game to be? Because it's important for me, like when we talk about whether it's religion or magic, etc., I want to get a feel for what the players want. Because ultimately, every time we sit down, I want them to want to be there. I want them to look forward to playing every single time we play. And if it's not something we can agree on in session 1, if it's not something that we can session 0 we can get to before we get to session 1, then we've got to figure that out. Because I don't want someone showing up and going, oh, this is just not the feel that I was hoping to have, and that sort of thing, right? It keeps your tables stickier, which normally is a bad thing, but in this case, sticky, I mean, is people wanting to be there and wanting to come back. So telling compelling story means that you need to have elements within that story that people are interested in hearing. And you can get a lot out of that in session 0 when they tell you what they want to hear. Hey, I want to hear this stuff. I want to be involved in this sort of thing. And so we dialed it back a little bit from the Kai Wynn portion. And I think we landed pretty well. We had some characters who were very much in tune with their chosen icon. And then, we went in a different direction in season 2. And I think we went in a different direction because I think that there were different stories we could tell. And ultimately, I didn't feel like the game setting was being properly supported by the publisher. And I turned out to be right, because Free League has totally ditched Coriolis as a setting, and they're in the sense as they're moving into the Great Dark, which is essentially 200 years in the future of the original Coriolis setting, where people have sort of shed the religious iconography, and it's a totally different vibe. And I think Arabian Nights in Space is a fantastic tagline. Really fun. Really, really fun. So we got to decide and define what the rules are when it comes to faith and magic and those unique mechanics. The other thing we have to decide on is how is accessibility when it comes to magic, whether that be divine or arcane. Who has access to it? Who can get it? Can everyone get it? So in a traditional fantasy D&D style game, that answer is technically yes. Anybody could take a class. They could add on to a multi-class potentially, and they could add mystical or divine power to their repertoire. In a setting like Shadowrun, that's not true. Either you've got the juice or you don't. And it's very rare for it to come around afterwards. And so when we talk about a fantasy setting, we've got to define how people have access to it, if they do. And then we must explore the consequences of magic. So how does the system impact society? How does it impact the economy? How does it impact conflicts? If this sorceress here, if she is wondrously powerful, and what she really enjoys doing is drinking tea and sitting in, cloistered in a study all day and reading about ancient arcane texts, that's great and all. But when war breaks out, or when a shipment of her favorite drinks don't arrive, she's going to get a little salty, and she's going to use phenomenal cosmic power to get her way. That's what magicians do, at least in some regard. So we have to understand in the world how powerful magic is, and then what impact it has on society, the economy, because it will impact the economy, and then conflicts that happened in those spaces. So I'd like to know, as one of our interactive questions, I'd like to know, what's a magic system that you love? Give me an example of something you have played, you've used the magic that in that system, and you love it, and tell me why. My example that I'm going to use for you on stream is Shadowrun. And the reason why I love Shadowrun Magic is I I think the great part for me is the cost. So adepts, or those with mystical abilities, the people who can access magic, have the ability to call and channel raw mana, raw power through their body. But it comes at a cost to their spirit or to their physical being, right? So they can cast this powerful magic, sure. But if they can't stave off the drain that it puts on their spirit or puts on their physical form, they're going to be impaired physically, mentally. And in some cases, they could even die from it. Because I think that magic has to have a cost. I think there has to be some sort of limit. Otherwise, unfettered magic is really difficult. So, Oni, I've never played Exalted. I've heard a lot about it from Fiery, of course. And maybe we'll get a chance to play it at some point. Exalted makes you feel epic, but depending on which side in the universe you are in, there are some rather severe consequences. That sounds interesting. Tifa loves Witchers, the Witchers magic system, specifically the one ritual that Witchers have to go through to earn their powers. Ooh, yes. I do think that having initiation rituals or ways that people get access to magic can be fun, not only in a setting, but obviously in the story as well. Because really what we're trying to build is a unique story. That's something that the Witcher universe has done pretty well. Bramble mentions Call of Cthulhu. The whole process is costly. Yeah, absolutely. So we have, as we have seen and heard on the show, when you summon stuff up in the Call of Cthulhu universe, when you tap into the phenomenal power of elder gods, there is 100% a cost to you, the caster. In rare occasions, there isn't a cost, but that's a super rare occasions. Yeah, I mean, very famously, it sort of cost one character their eyes and parts of their body. That's just the way it goes. But DCC is like that too. You can spell burn in DCC, and you can sacrifice physical attributes to make your spells more powerful, which is just a wild thing to do. But DCC is sort of gonzo, right? So like, it's meant for that. I had a game that I played in DCC where the wizard, where myself and another character ended up putting the shriveled up body of our wizard player in a wheelbarrow, and like just sort of like wandering around the space with them because they could no longer walk. They had sacrificed too much. Yes, Maggie. Yeah, we definitely had some experiences with Call of Cthulhu magic. So Oni, I'll have to check out Exalted at some point. I know that Fire would be willing to run a game when she's not doing a billion other things, but I just don't have any of the books, and that's okay. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm going to snooze that ad for 5 minutes because I think we can get through sort of the rest of some of this. Okay. So I'm going to ask a polling question, because who doesn't like polls? Oh, you're good. I appreciate you being interactive, Oni. You don't have to worry about that. So, should magic have hard or strict rules, or soft rules, or thus mysterious rules? So the poll question is going to be hard or soft. So the idea of defining a mystical system also includes the idea of figuring out how fluid it is. So Mage the Ascension does this in a really eloquent way. So it does both. It does a soft magic in the sense that it is creative. The ideas are created by players, and you tell the storyteller, I would like to do this, and here's how I believe I can affect the reality like that. And then reality also has strict rules that says, no, you can't, unless you can do it in a way that I can't see you do it, or I don't believe that you can do it. So I'll give you an example of Mage the Ascension Magic. Let's take this book here. I showed it to you earlier. This is Shadow Dark. I could, if I wanted to, with matter and mind, two different spheres of magic within Mage the Ascension, I could take this book and I could say, see, look, it's Shadow Dark. Everybody knows that that's what this book is. And if I had matter and mind, I could take whatever I was thinking about and I could change the pages into whatever I needed them to say. The great part about that is because the book is closed, you can't see me do that, right? The book's closed. You can't actually see me do that. And so reality can't tell that I've changed anything. And so there's no paradox. There's no backlash from reality. But if I were to walk outside and decide to throw a fireball down Main Street where people could see me do that, there would probably be people on that street or in windows and buildings who would say, hey, you can't do that. How the hell is that happening? And that would be reinforced by reality attacking me through a process called paradox, right? So Mage the Ascension sort of does that in both ways. It's pretty eloquent, I think. All right, let's see our poll question, see how we're doing. Most so far, hard is winning. That's interesting. Very interesting. Okay, I'm actually for a little bit stricter of rules when it comes to magic, in the sense that I want magic to have a cost and a system, because I think if it doesn't, I think it gets exploited. And when you exploit the mass magical system, you inherently create problems for what you're attempting to do if you're getting anywhere close to player game balance. We don't have to talk about game balance in this stream, promise. All right, last question of the night. What is a cool limitation that you'd put on a magic system to make it unique? So you've got this idea for a system for doing magic, and you realize that you got to put some sort of limitation on it. Is it spells can only be cast at a certain time? Is it these abilities can only be held by certain people? Is it something like The Witcher, where you have to go through a ritual before you gain access to them? What's the limiting factor? So in a setting that I'm working on, I love the idea that certain magic for certain people is only available during certain phases of the moon. Not that their power wanes or waxes based on the moon in the sense of spell strength. But I kind of like the idea that certain people only have access to specific spells during specific phases of the moon. And so it really, I'm hoping, will force people to be a little bit pickier about the spells that they take and things that they have access to at those times. All right. So Tifa's mentioned that she likes the sand loss mechanic. So in Call of Cthulhu, when you cast spells, it is very likely that you will lose sanity. The more sanity you lose, well, frankly, the more unhinged you can be. There could be something like each time you use magic, you lose a random or you lose in a random or chaotic way something you cherish. Huh. Okay. So they have something sort of like that in DCC, in the sense that if you if you spell fumble, they have fumble tables specifically for when you mess up magic, and that could be harm. That could do self-harm to you. That's very difficult. That could be very detrimental. When you mentioned each character needing to have something unique to the character's personality to use their magic. Simple example: Person X, who really likes the color blue, needs to use the spell components that are all blue. Okay, so they have to like color code themselves, or they have to have something specific. So Mage Ascension does this a little bit in the sense that they have foci. So like if I want to cast Forces magic and affect, if I want to affect the heat, or if I want to affect electricity, I have to have this, specific, charm or device on me that says, this is what I use to work the magic through. This is like a focusing device. So in that case, it would be, the focusing device could be a color, or could be maybe a specific scent or something like that. There's all sorts of stuff you could do there. So, Miss Emilu, magic makes you weaker until you rest. You can't do it again. So yeah, that is essentially actually exactly how first edition AD&D magic works. You have a certain number of spells that you can memorize every day. And once you use them, you're done. You can't use any of those mystical powers anymore. So they changed a little bit of the way D&D magic works later on, where they allowed you to make basically saving throws or spell saves where you could roll to see if the spell activated, rather than stripping you of the magic. So there's a couple different ways to do it. Bramwell mentioning material realities of politics, economy, and etc. Also loss of humanity or unforeseen consequences. Film at 11. So yeah. So Kit is mentioning a magic system is all potion based. That just sounds like you want to drink, but it could be totally viable. A lot of Witcher magic is him constantly ingesting something that he's concocted. So, okay, understood. We're continue working on the cardigan for sure. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, and I think that the important part is that you understand the fundamentals. You're going to create a system of magic. When you create it, you're going to have to choose who can access it. You're going to have to choose how the people who access it, how their how they're having access to it changes the fundamentals of society. And then also, what is the cost for them accessing it? So those are basically our tiered questions. Okay. So we are just about at 9. And so what I want to do is I want to pause our world building stream, but I want to raid a fun friend because I like raiding fun friends. And I think it would be fun if we did that. So I see some friends who are up. One being a friend of the channel. And that friend of the channel is Fiery Ashes. We're going to go raid Fiery Ashes and say hello to her. So thanks all of you for showing up to the world building. I loved all the interactivity tonight. As I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the things that I am hoping that you will do is consider reaching out and getting involved with our Make Your Mark. So that is the lupus charity that we're doing. I'll post it here in chat so we can see it. So that is our virtual 6 miles in 6 days that we're doing to help end lupus. You can absolutely join in the team and help us raise money for lupus. I think it's a super important cause that we're all excited to do. And I look forward to the next world building stream. Hopefully near the end of the month, we'll get a chance to jump back on here. So we're going to raid out, and I don't have any special fun messages. I just want you to say hello, and we'll catch you later. Take care of yourself and each other, and keep fighting.